Hello, and welcome to The Spotlight, where we explore how mental health and our identities intersect and influence each other. I'm your host, Liesl, and for some of us, romantic relationships are a crucial aspect of our identity, so I'm here today with Dr. Meghna, a clinical psychologist. She's bringing her years of experience in helping couples strengthen their marriage, enhance intimacy, and parent with emotional intelligence to our discussion today around marriage and partnerships. Dr. Meghna, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here, Liesl.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I follow you on Instagram. Everyone else can find you there too at Therapist Mommy, and I absolutely love your approach to relationships. And I'm so excited to have you on the show today. And I think one of the most important places to start is around what it means, like what a relationship means. What does it mean? Because I know in the Indian context, it's traditionally meant marriage, but it can be a lot more than that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much for having me here. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be interacting with you and to be sharing whatever little nuggets of wisdom that we can share amongst each other. So yes, a relationship in the Indian context is largely understood as within the confines of a traditional marriage. And I think Indian society is still very conservative when it comes to how it defines a relationship, and any relationship outside these traditional confines are still frowned upon. Even though, having said that, there are a lot of people, in fact, there's a whole majority of people out there who live secret lives. So they enter into relationships before marriage, which their parents might not be aware of. They enter into same sex or same gender relationships as well, and there's a whole spectrum of orientations and identities out there, none of which is very open even today, unfortunately, in India. So a relationship defined as a very heteronormative, marital confines is, I think, a very limited view of what exists in the reality out there in our country.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. So I think for the purposes of today's conversation, we'll be talking about partnerships and marriage, and we may use heteronormative language, but a lot of it is applicable to any kind of romantic partnership, no matter what gender or what orientation. So please forgive us for using heteronormative language throughout the podcast, but it is a little bit easier just because the vast majority of these relationships that we're talking about, particularly in India, are heteronormative. But I'm glad you brought that up specifically at the beginning, because I think that speaks to the mental strain that can often be brought about by just the nature of the relationship themselves, right? And when we talk about mental health, it's not just disorders or illness, but it can also just be stress. And if your relationship by its very nature is considered unacceptable by family or society, then that can add an immense amount of strain, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I think just the acceptability of this relationship outside of marriage or before marriage, it is really frowned upon by everyone. And I think we have a very limited view on what we consider even as love, even as romantic love, right? So we are not able to understand that one person, a healthy person, can love, even if they are in a committed relationship, can love more than one person. So love is also unfortunately defined within this heteronormative definition and the confines of a marriage. So that's one aspect to it. The second aspect is the whole mental health aspect, right? The strain and the stress of a relationship. What we don't understand is that this whole understanding of a relationship, which we get primarily through some sources, like one is media, one is seeing our own parents growing up, and third, seeing generally people navigating their own relationships around us. These are the primary sources through which we come to understand what is a romantic relationship, right? And unfortunately, our understanding of what constitutes a healthy romantic relationship can be very flawed. because the media representations are not perfect at all. In fact, the idea is that it should not be perfect, but in media, I think glorifies the completely wrong things. It, for example, glorifies longevity, which it equates to relationship success, which I do not believe talks about how intense is the love or the commitment or trust. You can be in a very, very unhappy sexless marriage for 10 years, right? That just because you're in this marriage for 10 years, is your relationship successful? I don't think so. Does that give way to a host of mental health issues? I think so. So, how we've seen our parents, how we've seen them model their relationship growing up is another factor. And that also, in fact, I keep saying this in my videos as well, that the way you've seen your parents' marital relationship being modeled is how you will actually unconsciously navigate your own marital relationship or your own romantic relationship, because that's the model you've grown up with. And yes, there are some other influences, but that's primarily what comes to us instinctually, because that's what has been wired within us.
I think we're dancing around like one big word. There's like this veneration of that generation and their relationships, and they've made it work and they've survived all odds. And like you're saying, the longevity of it is just meant to be, admired, regardless of how healthy that relationship is and how much, particularly mental well-being strain it has caused over the years. So let's just jump right in and talk about the elephant in the room, which is, I think, divorce. That, means that the relationship is short. And I think we all have in our minds, particularly from societal norms, this idea that a successful relationship is long, particularly a successful marriage. My question for you is, how does mental health play into the decision to divorce, the aftermath of divorce, all of those things that are supposedly, taboo?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. I love talking about this, particularly because I feel that no one lens can justify what we see happening in the reality out there. For example, when we say that, earlier our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation never got divorced, look at their relationships, and look at the current generation, they will divorce at the drop of a hat. I don't think that's something to be admired. I don't think if our grandparents and parents' generation did not get as easily divorced as, the current generation today, I don't think that's something to be applauded, because there were many, many factors, many, many forces operating at that time, which might still be prevalent today in some measure, that prevented those divorces. For example, the high social stigma. For example, the patriarchy or the lack of social support that was afforded to the woman, or the how she was viewed in the society if she was a single mother or a divorced woman. So the fact that a lot of this emotional, physical, sexual abuse within a marriage was normalized, and the fact that people today, and even financial abuse for that matter, was normalized, and it's not as normalized today. I mean, I think movies like Thappad, right? I think they are revolutionary in the sense that they do not accommodate for even one instance of violence in a marriage, and I think that's the way it should be. So I think looking at divorce in India, let's not jump to any conclusions. Let's not say that, divorces did not happen earlier, which was good, and divorces are happening now much more, which is bad. I don't think it's good or bad. I don't think that's the point. If divorces are happening too readily these days, then we have to understand, why is that happening? Is it because women are finally protesting against the unpaid labor they've been just assumed to do over the last so many years? Is it because of patriarchy and women realizing that this is not okay? Is it because men are realizing that I want an equal partner and not somebody who would just just not be an equal partner for me, right? So I don't think we can black paint divorce, because if it's happening, we need to look at why it's happening. If it's usually divorce is not a knee-jerk reaction, and hopefully people put a lot of thought to it. But with regard to mental health, yes, of course, a divorce is always tough, and it always carries a heavy mental health impact on all the parties, on all the concerned parties.
can a divorce be a pathway to better mental health? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why not? The problem comes in cases where one party is wanting a divorce and the other party is refusing the divorce. Then it needs to be contested. And of course, if there are children involved, there are custody issues. So that can be a very, very big mental health battle in itself. But yes, divorce can definitely be a pathway to better mental health, because there is nothing like recognizing that I'm in a toxic relationship or I'm in an abusive relationship, or simply I'm in a relationship where I'm not respected or I'm not valued, and this is not for me. And, after much deliberation, if you decide that this is something that I'd rather be out of this relationship than in, then of course it can be a pathway to better mental health.
As you were speaking, you said, if I realize this as sort of like the one party, but the thing about marriage, about romantic relationships, obviously, is that there are two parties. And I'm wondering, in your practice, what sort of issues do couples tend to come in with that might lead them to a possible breaking point? Like, what are the most common conflicts or disturbances to each of their mental well-being that they seek your help on?
In my own particular practice, Liesl, I've seen two major issues that lead to, the break point where the parties realize that this is not working out. One has been a pattern of, repeated pattern of feeling betrayed by your partner. So it has to do with, major and minor ways in which you feel that your trust has been broken, major and minor ways in which you feel that you're not respected, major and minor ways in which you feel that, you're not getting your needs met at all. Your emotional needs, your sexual needs, your financial needs, your physical needs, your need for love, care, and attention for you and for your children. So when people realize that I'm not getting any of my needs met, and, in fact, I feel betrayed, that's one of the major causes. And the second major cause, of course, that I see in my practice is when one partner has an obvious psychopathology.
So I want to go back to the idea of needs not being met in a little bit. But I do want to talk about this one partner's poor mental health. Because I personally have depression, and I know my husband gets the worst of it. When you're in such a close, intimate, personal relationship with someone, a lot of the behavior that is driven by your internal negative thoughts and emotions and just general state, they face it. They're on the front lines of it every day. It doesn't have to be a personality a disorder. It could just be if you're going through a really low period, or if you're going through a really anxious, overwhelmed period. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that kind of load, how on the partner, and how that kind of plays out. Because I know caregiver fatigue is a thing. Like, they can get worn out, and that has happened in our relationship, where my husband's just like, I love you, but like, I've been dealing with you for a while now, right? And it's getting to be a lot. And mental health, as much as we talked about with divorce, relationships can affect mental health. Mental health can affect relationships too.
Absolutely. And I see that a lot in my practice. In fact, I'm sorry, this must be quite tough for both of you. I can imagine that it must be, it's called caregiver's burden, as you said, caregiver's fatigue, or, it can lead to burnout. Yes, it's very difficult. And in such a case, there are two things to this, right? So the person with the mental health issue, if they themselves are in therapy, or if they are seeking some kind of treatment, that really always helps. The second thing that also helps is partner support. So in my practice, what I try to do is, if my primary client is, the person who is experiencing mental health issues within their marital relationship or within their romantic relationship, even though their partner is not my primary client, I usually like to have a few sessions of supportive, psychotherapy, it's called. So just to basically assess how's the partner mental health doing, because usually the partner also is impacted by the mental health issues of their partner, right? So in the case of your husband, I would love to assess how he's coping, and how he can be helped to amp up his ammo in a way, like what can be done to support him in a way that he feels more empowered, that to manage his life and to manage the relationship as well.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I think, mental health is just something we're getting comfortable talking about sort of in the most generic forms, right? Like, oh, it's normal to go through periods of feeling anxious. It's normal to go through periods of being depressed. It's even normal to have a disorder. But actually talking about what that experience is, it's like you're saying, when it comes to knowing what a healthy relationship is, we're not actually taught that. We're just expect to like absorb it from the ether.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for mental health struggles. If we're lucky, we might have some limited vocabulary for explaining it or describing what the experience is like. And if we're not lucky, we don't have any vocabulary. And so when you're trying to navigate that relationship with your partner, what I've personally found in my own relationship is that it's really difficult to actually explain what you're going through, particularly in real time.
Yeah.
Particularly when your brain is making you extremely reactive. Absolutely. Without actually, being able to stop and think things through. And it's often not until you sort of move past those periods that you're able to have conversations that allow both of you to process.
Yeah.
But those periods can be really tough.
Absolutely.
For both partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I highly recommend therapy for both the partners. Not just actually couple therapy, but also individual therapy for both the partners to get some perspective as to what is this happening? Like, for example, I'm actually in the process of recording a video for Instagram in which one partner says, hey, you didn't do this that I asked you to. I'm sick and tired of you doing this. And the partner's like, hey, wait a minute. In couple therapy, we learned that what we're fighting about is not actually what we're fighting about. We're fighting about something else. And then the other partner's like, what do you mean? And the first partner's like, remember when our therapist told us that you might be fighting about the dirty dishes in the sink or, cleaning your child's potty, but we're actually fighting about how seen you feel and how heard you feel by me. And the other partner's like,
and supported.
And supported, right? And the other partner is like, twing, like a light bulb goes on. So I think therapy, it can be really useful in also developing that vocabulary and that understanding and that insight about, okay, are we really fighting about this? Or are we really fighting about something else? Because a whole lot of our fights, when we take a bird's eye view, when I take a step back as a therapist and look at couples arguing or fighting about sometimes the same thing over years and years and years, they've fought about the same thing. There's some light that can be shined on, this is not what you're actually fighting about. What you're actually fighting about is, for example, an unmet need of connection or an unmet need of intimacy or whatever, right? So
I'm glad you brought it back to needs because I wanted to ask you more about that. I've read a lot about how emotions can help us clue into our needs. Can you talk a little bit about that? How couples can use those sort of like, when you're in the moment, all you're feeling are big reactions, you're feeling big emotions, you're reacting, and in the moment, you are fighting about the dishes, right? You are fighting about who takes the kid to the bathroom. But after that, if you think back, how do we use those emotions to sort of clue into what the fight is really about?
So I think that's a beautiful question. I love that because in my work on emotional intelligence, that's one of the fundamental things that I talk about. That emotions are so misunderstood by us. When we're growing up, we're always taught gussa mat karo, chillao mat. Matlab, we're always taught what not to do rather than what to do and how to look at our emotions in a healthy way. So we black paint emotions such as sadness or irritation or anger or even anxiety. We black paint them because we're like, don't experience them. Almost the message seems to be that these are bad. Whereas there's nothing bad about human emotions because all emotions are okay. All behaviors are not okay. So if you're getting angry, it's perfectly legit for you to get angry. And in fact, it's very validating if another person, even if it's your partner or whoever, can hold space for your anger. But it's not legit for you to throw a cup at them just because you're angry. So that's the principle number one, really, that you understand that my anger might be just because my partner refuses to take care of my child after a long day at work. I'm equally tired. Why can't they do it? Right? I get angry and my anger is legit, but the reaction or the response is not necessarily, just because I'm angry, it does not make it valid for me to respond in whichever way I do. So that's the first principle. And the second principle, Liesl, is that I encourage my clients to sort of sit in with their feelings. So sitting in with their feelings means that just experience those feelings. Don't try to shove them down. Don't try to push them away. Don't deny them. Sit in with them. It's painful. Yes, if I sit in with my anger, I will be seething. And it's okay for you to seethe with anger, but sit in with it. Alone, of course. And
it's so hard though. It's so uncomfortable.
Of course it's hard. Of course it's hard. That is why this work should begin from childhood. I mean, we are trying to master this as adults, but this should ideally be taught in schools. I don't know why it isn't. And when you sit in with your feelings, you will finally understand the message behind your emotions, because emotions are nature's way of telling us, of giving us messages about ourselves. It tells us who we are, what is important to us, what our needs are, what our values are. Emotions are very important clues and messages about us. If we really listen, emotions can tell us a lot. So the second step is always, always, always lean in and sit in with your feelings so that you understand the message. And when you sit in with your feelings and you understand the message, you might realize that I feel, that your anger is telling you, I feel extremely unsupported, or I feel taken for granted, when at the end of the day, and I'm equally tired, I'm expected to pick up the tab around the house, and it's pointing to some kind of inequality in your mind that you see. And you might then, as a third step, want to address that in a way which is not, of course, attacking or blaming your partner. And that is another skill to be learned. Those are communication skills to be learned then, in a way that I'm not blaming my partner, but in a way that I'm sort of collaborating with them.
The idea of sitting with emotions, particularly negative ones, I think that resonates so much with me, because I know personally, I really struggle.
Can I just pause you there? There's a reason why I don't use the word negative emotions, because there's nothing negative about them. So I just instead of negative, I say big hard feelings, because they're big, they feel overwhelming and they're hard. But negative has a negative connotation. I don't use the word. I don't think there's anything negative or positive about emotions, because they're all equally important, right? There's nothing negative about them, in the sense that they might be hard to experience, but they're important, right? And we don't want to shun them.
I think it's that hardness, that difficulty, the ones that are very difficult to sit with. The ones that are uncomfortable, they don't make you feel good. I personally really struggle with that. I much prefer distracting myself, doing anything basically other than keeping busy, overworking, whatever it takes. And I think that, that ability to be comfortable in your discomfort is critical, not only to, getting through challenging mental health, but also getting through a challenging period in your relationship.
Absolutely.
Right?
That
relationship is not always smooth sailing.
Absolutely. The ability to sit in with big hard feelings, with discomfort, to stare at it in the face, is nothing but resilience. There you have the perfect recipe for being resilient, because you're absolutely right. It helps you navigate your own life. It helps you navigate your relationship. And it's a journey. It's not an on-off button that, one day I'll sit in with my difficult feelings and I become resilient and I can put it on LinkedIn. No, it doesn't work like that. What basically it does to you, repeated toleration of and sitting in with your big hard feelings, helps you actually become stronger in your relationship as well as in your own life.
In my own relationship, my husband and I, very early on, we did a very long period of long distance. And, people used to ask me, how did you guys do it? What's your secret? And it's like, well, if it's the right person, it's both the easiest and hardest thing in your life. And I think that's true of relationship, romantic relationships, partnerships, committed relationships, marriage, whatever you want to call it in general, is that person will be the person who can make you feel the most comfortable, but they can also make you feel the most uncomfortable, the most unsettled, the most upset, just because of that intimacy. And you've got to be able to weather both phases of that relationship. And obviously there's a difference between uncomfortable in an evolving, we're going to work on it way, and in a disrespectful, abusive way. But that ability to sit with the sort of more evolving discomfort between you and realize it's not all fairy tales and roses.
Thank you for saying that, because I think this needs to be really emphasized, because that's what I see, that when I see in relationships, right, romantic relationships, when I see knee-jerk reactions, like I will break off because you did this or you said this which made me feel hurt or whatever. uh, I find that very surprising, because where is the effort to understand where the other person is coming from? Where is the effort to really tolerate that discomfort? And where is the effort to see if this is a one-off thing or if this is a pattern? You can't break off, or you can't take a decision based on something like a gap that has happened in your relationship. And I think this is also very romanticized by our media, that a perfect relationship is one in which there are no fights, or a perfect relationship is one in which the people understand each other, like they just understand each other, like you're talking about long distance. I
Yeah,
think
like on
there's
some like intrinsic visceral level,
yeah
they just get it.
they just
The
get
only
it.
person in
It
the
doesn't
world who
happen.
does.
It doesn't happen. Nobody
No.
gets it. It just doesn't happen, right? And this whole concept of soulmates. Soulmate will not come into your life fully formed. You have to work at it, just like in any relationship, even a parent-child relationship, even your relationship with your parents, or your relationship with your peers and friends. You have to work bloody hard at each of these relationships to make them work. So romantic relationship is literally the most important relationship of your life. If you do not work at it, it won't come. It won't be like perfect roses and chocolates and stuff. It won't happen like that. One of the biggest complaints that I receive, Liesl, in married couples who come and see me, say after 7 years into their marriage or 10 years into their marriage, is about intimacy. Oh, we don't have sex anymore. I'm like, why? Oh, we don't feel like it. I'm like, seriously? You wait for feeling to strike before you actually have sex? Seriously? That's so misplaced. Oh no, but we've seen it in the movies that it's just supposed to happen. Hello, it won't just happen. You have to make it happen. How many date nights do you go to? On in a month. How many? When I ask couples, and this is the most surprising one, when I ask couples, when was the last time you had a non-transactional conversation with your partner? Which means you're not talking about paying gas, paying bills, ordering the gas. You're not talking about parenting. You're not talking about your work. You're talking about your thoughts and feelings. When was the last time you had a conversation about your thoughts and feelings with your partner? People are like,
Yeah.
okay. And then when I prescribe connection time, which is just sit with your partner for just 10 minutes daily, 10 minutes. That's all, 10 minutes daily, and just share your thoughts and feelings. They're like, ma'am, can you give us some questions? We don't know what to talk. And I actually have questions, because I know majority of the couples that I see, and these are normal couples, no psychopathology. There's no mental health issues. There are no disorders. There is no, oh my God, you're going for therapy, you must be cuckoo. No.
I think this gets back in large part to what you were saying about media portrayals, right? Like we see the beginning of the relationship, right? But people grow and change. Like I'm not the same way I was at 22 when I started dating my husband. Like we're both completely different people. I mean, obviously there are some sort of fundamental similarities, and that's what you have to really, I think, remind yourself of and focus on. But sometimes you do kind of have to get to know your partner anew. If you don't put in that time, it's very easy to, like you're saying, just kind of devolve into these transactional conversations. And until you find out that
you've drifted apart.
Oh, I don't actually know this new person, right?
Yeah.
Like they've had life experiences that have changed them. You've had life experiences that have changed you, but you've never talked about how you feel changed. Yeah. And I think that this is so funny, because I feel like every podcast we come back to the same things over and over again. Mental health is relationships. Relationships is mental health. Communication is mental health. But it's so true. I think that when we are unable to communicate our internal worlds, like that's when struggles really, really set in. And particularly if we're unable to communicate our internal worlds with the person who we're in partnership with.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I would add to this mix of mental health and relationships and communication and emotional regulation is this whole thing about values. Whenever I talk about values, a lot of people look at me like I'm an alien. But the fact that whether you're at the start of a relationship or whether you are 10 years into your relationship, you need to constantly be in touch with what your values are. And you need to be constantly in touch with what your partner's values are and how they are evolving and changing over time.
Do they change?
Yes, they
Is
absolutely change, and it's normal and healthy to change. I once did a quick poll on my Instagram stories wherein I asked my followers, what are the values that your parents, that you grew up with, that your parents inculcated in you, and what are the values that you have now? A lot of people said things like, we used to believe things like, oh, homosexuality is bad or dirty. We used to believe that, marks are everything. And now we know to value hard work over the outcome, which is a very growth mindset value, right, to believe in. And I received such insightful responses. So a lot of people are in touch with their values, which is great for them and their relationships and their careers and how you're going to raise your children and for the most important parts of your life. But a lot of people aren't. And I would encourage every single person listening to this podcast to really just look within. And there are some leading questions, how you find out what your values are. And I'm happy to share them, in the podcast description maybe. But it's very interesting that how your values or what you grew up with and what you evolved into can directly impact the quality of your relationship.
And your own personal mental health, right? If you're not living in alignment with what you actually value and what you want out of life, then of course you're not going to feel good.
Absolutely.
Your emotions are not going to be I don't want to use negative. They're not going to be small, easy emotions. They're going to be big, hard emotions.
Yes, absolutely.
But I do want to take you back and ask you, when you talk about values, I'd like you to define that, because I think a lot of people confuse it with sort of like morals or ethics. So tell me in the, mental health and couples therapy realm, what do you mean by values?
Values are basically what's most important to you in life. And a very easy way to think about values, whether you're married or unmarried, whether you're a parent or not, is what are few of the things that I want to teach my child? What are some of the most important things that, whether I was taught them or not, that I would definitely want to inculcate in my child? And there you'll have an easy answer to, what is something that you hold close to your heart. Another way of approaching this question of values and figuring out your own values is, if nobody was looking and if you had enough money, what would you be doing? What are the different things you'll be doing? And the different things that you find yourself doing then, when you're not worried about money and when you're not worried about people judging you, is that is your authentic self. And that is the clue.
That sounds almost like freedom.
Yes.
Like values just sound like freedom.
Yeah, so values are our anchor. They're meant to be, they're meant to free us, and they're meant to anchor us in this life where we're open to so many things, so many influences, and so many people and so many media, everybody telling us what to, or Instagram, everybody telling us what to be and what not to be. I think it's important to figure out, sieve out the noise from the actual thing and figure out what it is really, who am I authentically, and what do I value and what moves me.
And how common is it for couples to have come to you having had that kind of conversation, either in the past, far in the past or not? Is that a common
Usually,
conversation?
No, it's not common at all. Usually by my second or third session, I do this exercise, this couples value exercise, wherein I get each partner to write their list of their own values. I give that as homework. And then we come together in the next session and discuss the individual values, of course, and evolve a list of common values, which would be known as the couple values, the family values, right? Because it's very important, because what we don't understand is two people in the Indian context, especially when there's arranged marriage or even love marriage for that matter, two people with two different blueprints are thrown in together. And they're supposed to create one blueprint. But there's no guideline for how to create one blueprint. You cannot construct a building with two blueprints, right? An architect works with just one blueprint. So when you're then navigating your relationship and life and careers and your kids and raising your kids, there's a lot of mixed messaging going on. Oh no, but I value this. Oh, but he values this. Oh no, but I was raised like this, so I'm going to do this. But he was raised like that, so he's going to do that. That is just a lot of noise. How about we come together and figure out how can we make this a seamless process? How about we come together and figure out what are our common values and what do we emphasize and what's more important to which partner, and how are we going to take that forward?
Arranged marriage, which is still very common, was sort of intended to eliminate any sort of mismatching values, right? Like the idea behind it is like, well, they come from a family that has a similar background, which obviously is code for certain things, but also tends to mean a certain values, right?
No, I actually no. I
things.
wish it was like that, but it's not. I mean, the only things that we seem to be concerned about are the salary, appearance, skin color, and height included. Caste, religion. I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't think that just because you belong to the same caste, you will have the same values. That is the biggest myth and misconception out there. It's complete bullshit if you're trying to delude yourself into believing that just because a person belongs to the same caste or the same religion as you, or just because they're tall and fair or handsome or whatever, your values will match. That's absurd. So no, in fact, I find a conversation about values completely missing, not just in arranged but also in love marriages, because all you're concerned about is, oh, he got me roses, oh, I'm so happy, I'm so lucky, he got me a diamond ring, oh, he earns this much, oh, he works in London, and therefore aage, and then, so no, I wish this conversation about values was part of every couple relationship, and I intend to make it that way. But no, I don't think maybe the intent of arranged marriages was that. I'm not denying that, but definitely that's not what's happening. The conversations are about dowry. The conversations are veiled conversations about how much money is going to be exchanged, or where are you going to buy a flat. I mean, come on. The only value then you're showing is greed, which is not even a value. So,
thank you for speaking so frankly.
Yeah, I've been known to dropping truth bombs. So yeah.
No, I love your truth bombs. They're amazing. I wish everyone was so prone to truth bombs on this podcast. That's what it's for, actually. I want to get into this idea that we've been talking about kind of throughout, this idea of conflict, whether it's about values, whether it's about, your needs and your feelings as a result of not having needs met. But anger, I think, like I said earlier, nobody can make you as uncomfortable or as your spouse. Nobody can make you as angry as your partner also.
And your child as well. I think kids have a way of pushing our buttons, right? Yeah. I mean, they just know how to push our buttons, right? Absolutely. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Absolutely. But how do you see families, I'm going to say families, actually, because like you said, it's not just your spouse. It's like all sort of familial relationships. And a partnership in India often comprises more than just the partner, right? Like a lot of people live in joint families with in-laws, brothers, sisters-in-law, nieces, nephews, and then their own children. But how do you see anger and conflict playing out in these relationships?
So I think that's a very good question, because I will again go back to the way we are raised, right? Even how to express anger. If you were brought up in a family where you saw conflicts being handled with loud noises and shouting and breaking items, that's kind of what you to an extent wire inside of you, and in a way normalize. And I'm not saying that that's what you will take that into your romantic relationship. I'm not saying that that's exactly how you might also respond to anger, but that kind of model, it becomes like a template, like a mental schema of sorts in your head, that okay, conflicts are loud, disagreements are loud, and they are bad, and they're meant to be played out like that. It becomes like a mental script for you. And if your partner is from the opposite kind of a spectrum wherein, they've been raised in a house where conflicts were more low-key, or things were just shoved under the carpet and there was no conversation, so that can also be very conflictual, right? When you're not having those hard conversations, that's in fact very conflictual. It might appear like peace on the surface, but it's not. It is conflict. There is a gap. So imagine two people thrown with these two different blueprints thrown into the mix, what do you get? One partner gets loud and shouty when there is a conflict, and the other person just withdraws, right? Because they've seen that, oh, this is not something that I can do, because this is not how I resolve conflicts, right? So it becomes very challenging then to understand where are they headed. It looks like the partner 2 doesn't want to engage, and partner 1 is just being very loud and almost disrespectful, right? So it becomes very challenging, and the way out is just to recognize your own patterns, to recognize what constitutes a healthy conflict resolution for me. 1, 2, how did I see conflict being resolved, in my growing up years, and what do I carry from there, and what do I need to unlearn from that? So it requires a whole lot of insight and self-awareness. And 2, it requires difficult conversations with your partner. See, babe, this is what I feel, and this is what you feel, and of course we are clashing at this. How do we go ahead? And this is a very difficult conversation, because pretty much everything that you want to talk about that is probably conflictual, parenting, finances, sex, values, whatever, right? Unless you talk about those things, you can't resolve them. And even that requires a whole set of skills. How do we talk, right? Which is why a lot of couples come for therapy, because they want to develop that language to be able to speak to each other without the other partner feeling blamed, attacked, criticized, or even treated with contempt.
You keep reaching back to sort of how you were raised in the childhood. And I want to talk a little bit about your own path as a therapist, because you started out as a kids therapist, right?
So I've trained as a clinical psychologist, which is what means is that I'm trained to see all the mental health conditions, and I'm trained to work with people across the entire board, right? Across the spectrum of all the mental health issues that there are. In my private practice, I do see people, adults, and couples, and I see the whole range of people with mental health issues. But my first love was always the area of child and adolescent mental health. Even my PhD was on adolescents at risk for depression, right? So I've worked throughout in this field, and then after my PhD, when I started practicing, I realized that in my sessions with children and adolescents, whenever I would, sort of teach them some skills or sort of work with them in a way that, they were understanding and learning how to cope with their mental health issues, they would go back home and their parents would undo everything that was being discussed in the sessions. And so it was so discouraging. I'm like, oh God. So I realized that I need to bring in parents as an equal stakeholder in my work with children and adolescents. And I need to develop a language to speak to the parents. And that is why I decided to do my postdoc in parenting, and I did that from the University of Queensland in Australia. So that's when I, after doing that, I was in India, and that's when I started my page, and I started talking to parents about parenting. And then I started seeing a lot of parents in my consultations, right? Because, parents started coming to me that, okay, our child is doing this, and what do we do, and how do we navigate this? And in my parenting consultations, I realized that the chinks or the gaps between the parents was standing out more. So they were arguing about how to handle their particular challenge of their child, but what became very obvious was their own disconnection and gap. And so I started training in couple therapy as well, because I realized that I can't help these parents who have such different ideologies and values and ways and ideas about raising their child, that again, I need to develop a language to, to do couple work. And so I specialized in that, and I started to talk to couples about couple work. And then again, I went back to square one, because in couple work, that's the one thing that you focus on. You focus on what is this person bringing to this dynamic from their past. So again, I've gone back to childhood.
Oh my God, it's all full circle.
I've come a full circle.
There's one other, I think, big thing that I want to talk about, and it's this idea of, we're talking about mental health in within relationships. And when you get right down to that, honestly, what it is, it's joint mental health, essentially. It's two mental health, overlapping together. And that in and of it, in and of itself is essentially a relationship, two inner worlds that are coming together. And obviously, like you've just said, there can be tons of ripple effects, right? Like on kids, on the rest of the family. But I also think that one of the sort of unspoken effects, and I think it's probably more profound for women just because of the way societal messaging is, but is a sense of identity that we get from our relationship and how much it can sort of bolster us, and also how much it can bring us to our knees if the relationship itself is going well versus going poorly. And when I say poorly, it could just be like one big fight if you're not used to having a fight, right? Or it could be like this serious period of turmoil where you're thinking maybe we shouldn't be together. But at the same time, this kind of joint identity needs to occur in some ways in order to be on the same page for raising children, for living cohesively. So how do you sort of keep that, both that joint identity and then also retain sort of like an individual identity within that relationship? Because that just strikes me as very difficult in navigating. And then, you hear stories of men and women sort of waking up when they're 60 and being like, what the hell have I been doing with myself? And suddenly asking for divorce. And it's because like they realize that there's no sort of counterpoint to this identity other than as a couple.
Yeah.
So how do you suggest navigating that?
By understanding and by realizing that I am not responsible for my partner's emotions. And I think that's the single biggest understanding and realization that people take back from therapy. Because as you said, it becomes like a joint mental health. It becomes like an enmeshment of their identities. And it is so important in that kind of a dynamic to understand that, yes, I am fused with my partner or my child, but I'm also separate. And how do you maintain that individuation is by realizing that I am my own person and my partner is experiencing XYZ, but I am not responsible for their emotions. I'm responsible for my emotions and they're responsible for their emotions. And my child is responsible for their emotions, even if they're screaming, I hate you, mom, you're the worst mom in the world. Let's regulate ourselves. And let's understand.
Not that happens or anything.
It happens to me all the time. This understanding that I am only responsible for my emotions, and therefore I can take care of other people's emotions, but ultimately I'm not responsible for their emotions. Cuts out a whole lot of drama and toxicity and crap from our relationships. It makes us much more regulated and much more in touch with ourselves. And when we understand that I'm supposed to be doing something about my feelings and not XYZ's feelings, whether that's my mother-in-law or whether that's my partner, it really helps.
Meghna, I've loved our conversation, truly. It's been great talking to you. And I'm going to offer you the opportunity to resolve this whole podcast. If you were to resolve it, what conclusions, what sort of last words would you want to leave us with?
Well, I would just say that relationships are hard work, and let's get into them for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons. I would just encourage all the viewers to read up about relationships, to challenge the models of relationships that exist in your mind, wherever you pick them up from, whether looking at your own parents or grandparents, or whether looking at your favorite, characters in media. Challenge everything that you see, and you might just be surprised where you might land up.
Thank you again, Dr. Meghna, for joining us today. I'm your host, Liesl, and this has been Spotlight, a podcast brought to you by Mitsu, a guided self-therapy app for anyone feeling anxious or depressed.